What's up, everybody? This week, sixth edition of the NFL Flowchart Show on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog has just added Pick'em Scorchers, where you can win 100x your bet. That's right, turn $5 into 500 in one game. Plus, every Sunday they're giving away $100,000. Use promo code SGPN at Underdog Fantasy for a 100% deposit bonus up to $500. What is going on, everybody? Happy to be here in week 6. Had a bit of a fun week 5. I don't think the cash flow chart did very well because we didn't have Jamar Chase. So that was tough to get there without the 55-point performance. However, GPP flow chart was a pretty good winner, and I'm thinking that it helped some people take down some small field lineups because we had that Miami Dolphins stack with Jamar Chase there in the GPP side of things. And so, as it always seems to work out, we can't nail both of them, but we're gonna try it again this week and get across the cash line and get bubbled up to the top there in GPPs. I do think it is a very interesting week 6 because number one, there's not a huge game environment that everybody's loving. There's not a big total that's far and ahead the rest of things, and then also I think there's not the cleanest of chalk this week. There's not the cleanest of popular players. We do have quite a few different injuries to account for this week, but I think there's people are priced accordingly, and there's only a few spots that are, call it, no-brainer smash picks. And I think when there's not a ton of great game environments and there's not a ton of great chalk, that leads to some more fragile chalk. And I think that's where we really want to try and exploit that in GPPs. So I think we'll start here, as we do every week, with the cash game flowchart. So let me get that shared here. Okay, so cash game core this week is we're sticking with 4 players. And then from there, there's actually quite a few different decisions to make. And so I think it's going to be a little bit tough to nail in on a cash game lineup. I will try to talk about it tomorrow morning with Mike on the Team Hold show, where I'm ultimately landing for cash. But I think right now it is pretty wide open, and there's a lot of things that we kind of need to tinker with and figure out where we're going to land. But I am pretty confident in the 4. I am very confident in the 4 players that we have in the cash core right now. And so, starting with running back, that would be Raheem Mostert, 6,400 for the Dolphins, and Deontay Foreman, 4,400 for the Bears. And then at wide receiver, we're just basically shoving in the 2 studs this week: Tyreek Hill, 9,300, and Jamar Chase, 8,300. So with this core, you obviously get 2 stud receivers in pretty good matchups this week. And then you also get kind of a mid-tier running back who's underpriced in Mostert due to the Devin Achane injury. And then Jeff Wilson is not going to be back this week. And I think there's still some potential injury stuff happening with Saab and Ahmed. So, or Ahmed. So Mostert, I think, is a really, really solid pick, should be in every single cash game lineup. And then, I think Deontay Foreman at 4,400 is a player that you could argue a bit. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard is at 4,300, and we'll talk about him a little bit later in the flow chart. And so I think, Colin Foreman, a core play, locked in play over Hubbard is potentially a spot that you could argue and you can swap around a bit. But I do like Foreman's potential usage a little bit more in this game against the Vikings. I think this game's going to be a little bit more high scoring, and I just think there's not a whole lot behind Foreman because every other running back is basically pretty hurt, and so it's going to be Foreman and Fields essentially taking all of the rushing. And we've seen Foreman have some big games in the past when he's got some of that rushing workload with the Panthers last year, actually in the same backfield as Chuba Hubbard. And so I think that's why I'm slightly leaning Foreman, but you can make an argument for both. Okay, So that's a pretty solid cash game core. You're going to be pretty happy with the output from these two stud receivers. I think the only other receiver that's up there in consideration would be Cooper Cup. He's $300 cheaper than Tyreek Hill. But I just don't think, I mean, we've seen, obviously, we've been disappointed by Chase a bit, but we've seen what he's able to do last week. And we haven't really been disappointed yet this year by Tyreek Hill. And so I think it's okay to just kind of let Cooper Cup have another week. I'm going to talk about Puka a little bit in the GPP flow chart, but I actually like him a lot this week. And so I think just kind of go with what's safe, Tyreek and Jamar Chase, and don't feel the need to differentiate down to Cup. Okay, so at the quarterback position, Gardner Minshew has opened up a lot of opens up a lot of good options at a $5,000 QB tag. And so he'll kind of be able to help us fit in maybe some higher priced options if you prefer that in kind of some of the later decision points. And then the other quarterback I think that's worth considering this week would be Joe Burrow at 6,300. The quarterback tiers themselves are relatively flat this week. We've got Jalen Hurts at the top at 8,200. And then we've got Tua and Justin Fields in like the mid sevens, and then a lot of guys in the mid sixes. And so, and there's nobody that's like absolutely popping off from a projection standpoint. And so I think Minshew makes a lot of sense at 5,000. I mean, we've seen him have some good passing days with the Eagles before. We saw him fill in pretty nicely. I think that was in week 3 with the Colts, and I mean he threw for 200 something yards, a touchdown, and that's about it. But at $5,000, we don't really need a ton from him, and so we just kind of want to have him focus on trying to rip apart this Jaguars passing defense and just feed some passes to Pittman and Josh Downs and call it a day. And then on the flip side, Burrow, the Seahawks have not had the greatest defense this year. And if you can add in some correlation there with Burrow and Chase, obviously that's always useful on the cash game side of things, but definitely not a necessity to force that stack. I do just think he's the best priced mid-tier 6K quarterback. Okay, so make that decision point at quarterback, and then there's another decision point to make at tight end, and that's between Evan Ingram with the Jaguars at 4,500 and Logan Thomas with the Commanders at 3,500. I think Ingram's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of Jaguars that are popping this week. The Colts don't have a very good defense, and as such, the Jags, quite a few of the Jags players are showing as good value. ETN, Ingram, Christian Kirk, and so I think Ingram is a pretty solid play there. We know he's a target getter, so we shouldn't be too concerned about that. We shouldn't be too concerned about his floor. I am a bit concerned with the price tag at 4,500. That is getting up there for a cash game tight end. Laporta last week, I would argue, is a much safer play, and he was only 5,000. And so I am a bit nervous about that. I'm likely going to play the Logan Thomas path at 3,500. Coming off an 11 target week last week, I think Thomas and he's matched up with the Falcons this week, who are giving up the most fantasy points to tight ends this year. And so I think Thomas is a really good play this week at 3,500. There's also, a few other tight ends to maybe consider if you want. You can take a look at Kyle Pitts in that same game with Logan Thomas. You can take a pick at Jonnu Smith as well. But I'd rather just take the one guy that's priced at 3,500 that's not going to have any other tight end competition on his own team than go straight to two potential tight ends that are going to eat away at each other at the same exact price tag, right? So last week, Pitts and Smith made a little bit more sense because they were cheaper. But now they're both up at 3,500, which still is relatively expensive for a cash game tight end. The really cheap tight end that is worth taking a swing at, and we'll talk about him in the GPP flow chart, is Mike Gesicki, who's down there at 2,700. The Patriots are a little bit beat up and battered this week in the receiving game, and so I could see Mike Gesicki get in some more run this week. And so I don't think that's a horrible option at 2,700 to save that $800. I just wasn't able to play around and make things work really cleanly with Jaceki, but maybe with a little bit more messing around, a little bit more tinkering, there could be some viable Jaceki paths. Okay, so those are the decisions to make there. Obviously, you can see kind of the price point differences. Then for kind of the fill in the gap, right? And so, I put in some defensive options here. I would do defense last. I just put them in this column. I think the Browns, Bucks, the Bears are all pretty viable. Honestly, there's not really a defense that sticks out to me this week for cash. It doesn't look like there's going to be a popular one in the cheap range, and I'm just never going to pay up for an expensive defense in cash unless there's like a really clear path to a lineup, and I don't think there is this week. And so honestly, like every defense under $3,000 is projecting pretty well, and is projecting for pretty spread out ownership, which is a bit scary on the cash side of things because if you get the defense wrong, and 10 or 15% of the field has a different defense and they go off, that's definitely something that could put you behind. But I think I'll try to keep my finger on the pulse a little bit more, try to figure out where people are headed with defense in the most popular builds, see what's going to be most popular in cash, and then we'll probably just try to funnel there. I'll update that tomorrow morning as well on the show with Mike. So, anyways, the the third column this week is you kind of need to pick your cheap piece, and so we started with Deontay Foreman, and from there, so you have a cheap running back already. You can decide to have two cheap running backs this week, and both of these kind of pairings work with really any of the decisions that you go with. I think if you do go with Burrow and Ingram, you have to go the Hubbard and Downs route. So that'll be two cheap pieces in this last column. But any of the other mixing and matching Burrow and Thomas, Minshew and Ingram, Minshew, Thomas, stuff like that is where you can pay up a little bit more. So you can choose your cheap running back in Chuba Hubbard. So again, that would be the second cheap running back in our lineup, which would bring us to three running backs overall: Chuba, Foreman, and Mostert. And then from there, you would pair your third receiver, depending on what you decided at quarterback and tight end. We'd either go with Michael Pittman, 6,300, Christian Kirk, 5,400, Marquise Brown, 5,300, Josh Downs, 4,100. And so again, that's just kind of based on the pricing from the columns prior. Between Kirk and Marquise Brown, that's a tough one, and that's a decision that a lot of people are going to be having to make this week. Brown is a bit questionable, but if he is a full go, which is tough because it's a late game tomorrow, so hopefully we get that news in the morning. If he's a full go, then I think I would lean Marquise Brown. But a lot of people are going to be playing Christian Kirk, and I think he's going to do well. I mean, he's going to face some zone defense, which he typically is a little bit better against man. But I'm not sure, how much that stuff matters. And then yeah, like I said, you could pick kind of between Pittman and Downs in some of these, and those can complete some stacks with Minshew. Jamie's asking in the chat, do you like that Minshew and Downs stack this week? Yeah, definitely. I honestly, so in for cash games specifically, it's never a requirement to stack the quarterback. But I do think whenever it can work out and you're not really reaching or stretching or anything like that, I do think it's obviously a big positive to stack the quarterback, because what a lot of times people talk about in cash is that floor. But if you're playing a lot of double ups, if you're playing a lot of head to heads in cash and less of the double ups, you do want to account for that ceiling outcome in the head to heads, because you're not just having to beat half the field, you're having to beat one player and you don't know what exact lineup they're going to have. And so having a little bit extra ceiling in your head to heads, in the lineup that's going to go into the head to heads, I think makes a lot of sense. And we get that with the correlation, right? So Burrow with Chase, Minshew with Downs, Minshew with Pittman, stuff like that really works. And then the other one that doesn't really have a ton of other options to pair with it, which is why I only have this double pairing here, is to start the cheap piece with Josh Downs, and then you can also fit in Kyren Williams at running back. And so just to kind of recap the decision point there at running back, really what you're doing is you're deciding, do you want Raheem Mostert and Kyren Williams with Deontay Foreman? Or like I said, you couldn't mess around and put in Chuba Hubbard there. Or do you want to do Raheem Mostert and Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard, and have kind of two cheap running backs. And I mean, this is my preferred path, right? I prefer Mostert, I prefer Foreman over Hubbard and Williams, although they're not that much far off. But if you have a strong position on Williams over Mostert or Hubbard over Foreman, you could easily pivot those guys to the core and move those other guys around and see what your other options are. So relatively kind of flexible this week, which actually makes it pretty tough in cash. And again, I think it's going to be a lot of late um, decision points as we get to lock. And I'll try to, like I said, I'll try to keep my finger on the pulse a bit and figure out where the crowd is going. And if there's any super, super chalky pieces that we want to get into cash, that way we're not dealing with that risk. Okay. I think that about sums up the cash game pick. We'll hit the ad read here. Underdog Fantasy has a way to play alongside your favorite football team all season long. Underdog has just introduced Scorchers. Go 5 for 5 and pick 'em Scorchers and enjoy a spicy 100x payoff. And for a limited time, Underdog is extending the first deposit bonus up to $500. Also, $100,000 Sundays continue on Underdog Fantasy. 10 lucky players will win 10K each. So watch along, make your picks, and maybe make a little cash over on Underdog's mobile app or website, underdogfantasy.com. When you sign up with promo code SGPN, Underdog will double your first deposit of up to $500. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code SGPN. Okay, now let's get into the fun stuff. This is going to make some people feel squeamish, but if we're not doing that, we're not playing GPPs right. All right, here we go, baby. Jimmy G, Jimmy Garoppolo, and the Raiders are headlining the GPP flowchart this week. It's gross. It's ugly. It has a pretty decent chance of failing. But let me before you start hating, let's just take a look at what the most popular quarterbacks are going to be this week. Most popular quarterback out of the gate is Joe Burrow. We've already seen Joe Burrow have a couple failures this year specifically. We also have Matthew Stafford going to be pretty popular, 6,100. We also have Trevor Lawrence going to be pretty popular, 6,500. Gardner Minshew at 5,000. And then that's the top tier of four quarterbacks that are going to be the most popular. Burrow, Stafford, Lawrence, Minshew. None of those guys are huge threats on the ground, right? None of them are big threats to steal a lot of rushing, right? The two guys that are potentially, rushing threats are Hurts and Fields, and then the other kind of person that we have to be worried about is Tua, who's got doesn't really have the rushing upside, especially after the concussions. He's not been rushing a whole lot this year, but does have this just explosive Miami offense under him. And I think, has plenty of potential to put up some high scoring games. However, Jimmy G is $2,000 cheaper than all of those guys. And $3,000 cheaper than Hurts. And so when we kind of take a look at so I run some of the simulations, and I basically look at players' average score over the past few years, and I take their standard deviation that they have basically to help understand their range of outcomes. And then I pair that up with their projection this week, and I run a simulation of like 200 games or something. And basically that kind of gives me an idea of how often players are hitting certain thresholds. And obviously like the 4x and the 5x threshold is really what we want to try to target in GPPs, right? If your whole lineup hits 4x, that means you're scoring 200 points. And that's definitely usually good enough to have a sweat in some of the small to midfield contests. And so Jimmy G is just really popping off the charts here this week when it comes to those 4x and 5x projections. And like I said, there's just not a whole lot of other quarterbacks to be scared about this week per se. And so I think Jimmy G is totally fine. Load him up at 5,300 and let's have some fun with the Raiders. The other thing that's really exciting about the Raiders, and again, the Raiders have not been great. They've not been super exciting. I get it. They kind of suck as a football team. They're also playing a team that really sucks as a football team called the Patriots. But the thing that's really, really enticing about the Raiders is they have a super condensed offense. Like the most condensed offense in the NFL this season between Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, and Jacoby Myers. These three guys are accounting for over 85% of the non-QB fantasy points this year. So, like, you could play a block of all three of them, and they would score pretty much all of the Raiders' points this weekend. Now, of course, the Raiders put up 13 points. That's not great. But if the Raiders get to 25, 30 points, it's definitely going to be coming through these three guys. And so that's just what we've seen so far from the Raiders this year. And so I really want to lean into that condensed offense and see, if we can finally have a week here where the Raiders go off a bit and do some damage against the Patriots. So we're going to start with Devontae Adams in every lineup. I think right off the bat, that gives us a pretty good shot at keeping up with the Jamar Chases, the Tyreek Hills, the Cooper Kupps, those kind of lineups. We know Devontae Adams has big games. Devontae Adams also has a pretty good history, mostly on the Packers, of course, of following up dud games. Last week, I think he only had like 3 or 4 catches, following up dud games with really big performances. He's had like 3 or 4 games when he was on the Packers where he comes out the week after a single digit performance and puts up 30 plus. And so I would expect Adams to just be demanding targets this week and to really kind of get him cooking against the Patriots, who are without their rookie Christian. I'm missing what his name is. He's a rookie, I think. Whatever that corner is, he's out for the year. I forget what his last name was, but yeah, he's out for the year. So I think their pass defense is going to be not as good as maybe it seems on paper. Okay, so then from there you just kind of pick the other Raider that you want: Josh Jacobs at running back 7,000 or Jacoby Myers at receiver 5,800. I really think Josh Jacobs is one of the better running back choices this week, just because he's been getting like a ton of usage, and he maybe hasn't got there yet on touchdowns, but he's been getting a ton of usage. He's been getting actually a pretty good receiving game play, which isn't typical for Jacobs. And he's just really getting all the running back opportunities here. And so just keep feeding him, and hopefully if we pair him up with Jimmy G, he tosses him off a little dump off and we get a touchdown and we get it for both guys. So I think that's really good. And of course, starting with Jimmy G stack kind of lets you do whatever you want on the back end here. Um, and so I think that's a really exciting thing this week because, again, like I said, there's not a ton of good chalk. Got to sneeze. Oh, didn't come. I don't think there's a ton of great chalk. And so being able to kind of do what you want on the back end, starting with that lower owned piece, I think is pretty fun. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to move to column 2, where we're going to pick our tight end and our chalk running back. So these are the exact same 2 chalk running backs from the cash game flow chart: Raheem Mostert and Kyron Williams. Kind of take your pick there. Obviously, Mostert's going to be a bit more popular. Kyron Williams does have pretty good odds on, I forget where it was, DraftKings that I saw it, that pretty good odds to score a touchdown this week. But they're basically the same price, pretty interchangeable. I think either of them are pretty good options. And then at tight end, again, you could go with Mike Gesicki as the bring back on the Patriots. I think I might have got his price wrong there. No, he has 2,600. So you could go with Mike Gesicki as a bring back on the Patriots. I also don't think you need to force it, because we just saw the Patriots lose 34-0 to the Saints last week. And so I don't think you need to force a bring back this week with the Patriots. However, they are a bit injured. They are a bit banged up. And so there are some options on the Patriots if you want. Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, Mike Gesicki, I think, are the 3 that I would kind of go with if you're hot and heavy on having a bring back in this game. I like Gesicki a lot just because he's basically min price for a tight end. We haven't really seen a very big game out of him, but at 2,600, you don't need much. And you would expect him to be on the field a little bit more with a couple of their receivers banged up: Juju, and then Demario Davis or Douglas or whatever his name is, also a rookie. So yeah, I think that's decent there. And then, like I touched on in the cash game flow chart, Logan Thomas, I think, is a really good tight end pick this week. And I think out of the group that he is priced around, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz, Zach Ertz, I actually think Logan Thomas will come in lower owned than all those guys. But Sam Howell has been feeding this guy quite a bit. And he got 11 targets last week, and I just think he's a pretty good play, especially against the Falcons, who are giving up a lot of points to the tight end. Okay, so you can kind of mix and match. I have a note here at the in that column that you can mix and match those around if you're building multiple lineups, right? So don't just think you have to pair Mostert with Thomas or Williams with Jaceki. That's just how I kind of threw them together on this chart. And now column number 3, the first time we've had this column this year called "Pick Your Leverage," and I think it's really this is one of the more fun columns to have, one of the more fun decision points to make. And again, this is in a week where we don't think the chalk is super strong, right? And so when we don't think the chalk is super strong, we can either fade that chalk, right? If we just think it's like a bad, like people are, it's it's fragile, right? So the chalk we think is fragile. There's more fragile spots this week, and so we can either completely fade it and just say, no, I'm just gonna like skip that player, skip that price group, whatever. Or if we think that the environment or the game environment or the team environment is still a pretty good environment this week, we can find leverage within that chalk, right? We can find leverage pieces to try and give our lineups advantage over the field, right? And so and leverage is super important to think about, right? And it's not something that I've talked about a ton so far this year. But as the weeks go on, we typically see this happen where the chalk does start to become a bit more fragile, especially if there's not a ton of, if the pricing is pretty efficient, there's not a ton of super obvious chalk. So then the chalk becomes more fragile. The popular plays become more fragile, and then the leverage really sticks out. And so if you think about it, this week the Jaguars are going to be pretty popular. Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne are all going to be pretty popular plays. And so, Calvin Ridley is going to be a half or a third percent of the ownership of all three of those guys. I think all those guys are going to be in the high teens, low 20s, and Calvin Ridley's probably going to come in at like 5 or 8%. And we just like think through like the range of outcomes, right? Like, could Calvin Ridley score 30 points in this Jaguars offense and be the piece that you needed? The answer is yes, like easily yes. Like, yes, he's had some bad games. That's why he's not going to be popular. That's why his price tag and his projection are not very sweet this week. But he's also like completely capable of taking over, having a couple touchdowns, having a big day. And when that happens, and your Jaguars piece is not one of those other 3 guys, and it's, Calvin Ridley, instead of picking Kirk having a good day, and now you're up at the top of the leaderboards fighting between 22% of the lineups. You pick Calvin Ridley, he has a good day. Now you leapfrog all those Kirk lineups, and now you're at the top of the leaderboard fighting with 5 or 8% of lineups. And that means the rest of your pieces don't have to be as perfect, right? If you have a lot of popular players that do well, that means the rest of your lineup needs to be more perfect in order to win a tournament. If you have a leverage piece that does well, that leapfrogs those popular pieces, it puts less pressure on on the rest of your pieces in your lineup to be perfect in order to win that tournament. So that's why it's always, always important to just try to think through the leverage plays, try to identify where some of those are. Okay, so talked a bit about Calvin Ridley there, 6,700 for the Jags. I think Tyler Boyd is another really fun leverage spot this week. It's a little bit contingent on the T. Higgins status. I can't remember if I think he's still questionable. We'll have to kind of take a peek at his availability, or he may have been ruled out already. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like things are trending in the right direction for Higgins, and he may end up sitting another week. And even if he does play, he may not much more than a decoy. Tyler Boyd was a pretty popular pick last week and he failed a little bit. So I think people are just going to be off of him. But it's really the same environment against actually a little bit of a better pass defense. Actually, no, Arizona's horrible. So still a bad pass defense though this week in the Seahawks. And so I think Tyler Boyd could get there and he would be pretty good leverage off of Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon. And of course, we're not thinking Jamar Chase is going to have a bad game, but if Tyler Boyd's the one that catches the touchdowns, then we're really cooking with gas here in this flow chart. And then the last leverage piece is Amari DeMercado, who's a running back for the Cardinals at 4,900 this week. And again, I think this Cardinals Rams game is probably going to be one that people start coming around on, and is going to be pretty popular by the time Sunday rolls around. Neither defense is very good. Both the passing offenses have shown some potential and shown some upside this year. And so I think a decent amount of people are going to play pieces from this. And so right off the bat for the Cardinals, um, Zach Ertz is shown pretty popular. Marquise Brown, although I believe he is still questionable, he's shown to be pretty popular. And DeMarcado is not projecting very well because a lot of the sites are projecting that he's going to have a split backfield with Keontae Ingram. But I think that he's showed a little bit more juice. Keontae Ingram's coming off, I believe, a neck injury, which is always, not the most positive of things to come back from. And I think DeMarcado is going to be able to definitely take the load of this rushing attack without James Conner. And the only reason that he is not popular this week, because 4,900 is a great price tag, is because people think he's going to split the backfield with Ingram. But we're just basically asking ourselves a question: what if that doesn't happen? What if he doesn't do that? And then he's a great option at 4,900, and he provides leverage off of Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard at like 4,400, 4,300, that same kind of price group. If those guys kind of dud out or just, basically 3x their projection or something, or 3x their price tag, and DeMarcado has the big game, you're just totally cooking. You're now competing with similar lineup builds, right? We have the Devontae Adams. We have some more high-priced receivers here that are going to be in those similar lineups, and you just have a ton of leverage off those really chalky running backs. So I think he's a really fun option, a really fun decision point to have, and I really want to try to keep my eye on beat reporters or some coach speak or whatever from Cardinals coach to see if there's anything leaning that DeMarcado is going to get the bulk of the work here. And then again, like I said, I love pretty much all the defensive options below like 2,700. I think I just picked a big group here: Browns, Bucks, Cardinals, Bears, Lions. Just kind of mix and match and make them work, especially if you're doing multiple lineups. I wouldn't get too heavy on a defense. Nothing's going to be popular this week, so just kind of spin them around and whirl it around. So choose one of those leverage pieces: Ridley, Boyd, or DeMarcado. And then in the last column, you're actually going to be able to fill in two of these position points. You may need a running back if you went the Jacoby Myers route. You may not need a running back, but you want to play a running back. It is a really strong running back week this week. In cash, I think most lineups will have 3 running backs. And so I think it's pretty viable to play through the running backs in GPPs as well. Just overall stronger projection than the wide receivers this week. So starting with the running back position for the fill in the gap pieces here, Bijan Robinson, 7,200. One of these weeks, Bijan is going to go off. He's going to have a runaway week. He's going to have the 35 DraftKings points or something, have the 100-yard bonus, have a couple touchdowns, have 7 or 8 catches, and he's going to be the guy you need. And so I just kind of don't want to miss out on that week. And so I want to keep chasing it. And this week, he went down in price, and he went down quite a bit in ownership. And so that's a wheels up opportunity for me. I really, really like that potential. DeAndre Swift, 6,100, really great play this week. I think there's been a lot of focus on the Eagles passing game. Obviously, we saw the big Devontae Smith week in week 1. We saw the big AJ Brown week last week, or I think, yeah, last week he did well. 2 weeks ago he did really well. Last week he did well. Goddard did really well last week. But the Jets defense is not as susceptible to the pass, and they're a little bit more susceptible to the run. And so I think Swift and Hurts should have a little bit more success this week. I actually think Jalen Hurts plus DeAndre Swift is a really sneaky way to attack this game, and don't include any of the receivers, and just kind of hope the receivers have so-so games, but Swift and Hurts score, 3 or 4 touchdowns on the ground, or Hurts even passes one to Swift. I think that would be great too. But we saw like 3 times last year where Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders both scored like 30 points in the same game. And I think that's definitely possible this week with Swift and Hurts against the Jets. And then I fit in Deontay Foreman here too. Like I said, I prefer him a bit more to Chuba Hubbard. He does make some things work within the flow chart to fill in the gap there. And of course, he's going to be popular, like I said. So I wouldn't pair, DeMercado with him because that's a leverage point that we're trying to have. And so I would kind of maybe put him more in the Calvin Ridley lineups or something like that, where you can pay up a little bit more at receiver. Okay, then at receiver, Puka Nakua. I hinted at him a little bit earlier when we were talking about Cooper Kupp in the cash game as a potential option, but I think Puka Nakua is a really interesting play this week. Matthew Stafford is going to be popular for a reason. It's because he's pretty likely to just hit the the 300-yard bonus. I think the Rams are going to pass all over the Cardinals, and the Cardinals just don't have a very good passing defense at all. And so but the Rams just run like a ton of 11 personnel, and Puka, Cup, and like Tutu Atwell are just always on the field, always on the field. And I think Puka could be eating up some of those underneath the targets that the Cardinals are susceptible to give up. And so at 8,000, he doesn't project extremely well for his price tag, but I think we've already seen that the upside's there. And on DraftKings, when you start racking up those catches, get close to the 100-yard bonus as well with the full point PPR, I think Puka is a really great play and is also some pretty good leverage off of Cup, but gives you that ceiling too. I think people are still in the mindset like, oh, Cup's back, Puka's a bad play. I think both these guys are just going to be like top 15, top 18 receivers all year. And so I don't want to get off of the Puka train just yet. Mike Williams is back this week, is healthy this week. He is a full go after having a little bit of an injury. And so I really like him at 7,100. We've already seen him play really well this year. And I think this Bucks Lions game could be a pretty high scoring affair. And so give me access to the guy that's got the highest ceiling in that game is what I want. And then Adam Thielen, again, is some pretty interesting leverage. I think there's some wide receivers around his price tag that are going to be popular, as well as the Panthers are going to be popular. And so I think, mostly Chuba Hubbard on the Panthers are going to be popular. And so I think Adam Thielen's a pretty fun play. 5,900. We've seen him just get a ton of targets this year, and so I think he is a great option there. Mostly paired probably in your Ridley lineups as well if you need the cash savings. Okay, so I think that about wraps it up. We're starting with the Jimmy G double stack with Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs or Jacoby Myers. Then we're picking a tight end. We're picking if we want it to be a bring back with Mike Gesicki or if we want to go Logan Thomas. And then we're picking a chalk running back to pair with that lineup, Raheem Mostert or Kyron Williams. From there, you're going to decide on one leverage piece, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, or Amari DiMercado. And then in column number 4, you're going to choose 2 of those pieces to kind of fill in the gap, plus obviously your defense, which I said anything below 2,700 looks pretty good for me. So I think that wraps it up. Thanks everyone for joining this week. Had a lot of fun talking through it. It's a tough cash game slate. It's a fun GPP slate. And enjoy. Hope to see you at the top of leaderboards. Later.